Chris has done his, I think, anyway.
He's got to present it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's looking at it. Okie dokie, off you
Right.
go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Right, I'm going to talk to you today about genetic engineering as a means of actually fighting carbon emission. But before I dive into it, I want to talk to you a little bit about the carbon cycle. And the reason for that is I want to get the point across that CO2 is actually a normal and entirely expected component of the Earth's atmosphere. You can see here, it's a rather rudimentary image of the carbon cycle. But you can see how respiration, volcanoes, forest fires, they actually all put CO2 into the atmosphere. It's pulled back out again through the process of photosynthesis, but also the ocean can absorb it. Now I'm talking mainly today about the terrestrial biosphere. That's going to be everything that's alive on the land, or in the land. I'm not talking about anything in the ocean. Now the problems occur when you start to destabilise the carbon cycle, and that's what's actually happening in the modern industrial age. There's far more carbon being put into the atmosphere from human sources. And the reason this is a problem is because carbon dioxide actually has two double bonds joining a carbon atom to two oxygen atoms. And these double bonds actually absorb part of the infrared spectrum. And when they do this, they start to vibrate, and they give out heat, and they do this indiscriminately. So this heat radiates in every direction, including back down towards the Earth. So the more carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere, the greater this warming effect is going to be. And if the industrial age is actually, industrial sources are putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than is actually being taken out, then what you're going to get is a net increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the primary sources of this is the combustion of fossil fuels. Now what I've got here is two equations, and these are actually general formulas for the complete combustion of an alkane and an alkene. Now you've encountered these before, but what you need to really take notice of is that 100% of the carbon on this side of the equations that exists in the alkanes and the alkenes and in other organic compounds actually gets converted into carbon dioxide. There's no carbon dioxide in any of the other products. That's where all of it is going. So what we've essentially got is there's an estimate of 4,130 gigatons of carbon that exists in the form of hydrocarbons in the Earth. There's at present approximately 720 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere, estimated. And there's about 2,000 gigatons of carbon that exists in the form of organic life and organic compounds in the terrestrial biosphere. That's inside of us, inside of plants, inside of anything that's alive. Because any organic compound, as you all know, has a carbon frame. The primary means of pulling this back out of the atmosphere is called photosynthesis. You can see here we have sunlight driving the conversion of carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and into this molecule here. Now this is called glucose. It's on here as C6H12O6, and you can see from looking at it that the frame of glucose, all of those black balls there, is predominantly carbon. That's a way of actually storing carbon dioxide as it's taken out of the atmosphere, because once again you're seeing that 100% of the carbon that exists as carbon dioxide is converted into the glucose. That's where all of it is going. This is then converted into things like starch, which then becomes cellulose within the plants, and then when those plants are eaten by herbivores, that becomes components of those animals. They're then eaten by carnivores, which becomes components of those animals. And you can see how the carbon is actually put into the terrestrial biosphere by being pulled out of the atmosphere via photosynthesis. The problem, as I mentioned before, is that photosynthesis is not actually enough to pull out all of the carbon that's being put into the atmosphere. And this is where I get to the genetic engineering part. Scientists at the Lawrence Berkeley and Oak Ridge National Laboratories in the United States have actually been genetically engineering trees. And they've been genetically engineering them so that they grow bigger, faster. Now, the real benefit of that is that all the leaves are larger, which means photosynthesis is happening across a larger surface area, and there's a greater overall surface area covered in leaves. So photosynthesis is actually happening at an increased rate over a large surface area. Now they're using predominantly poplar trees, but they've also got eucalyptus trees, which take up about 20% of what they're using. And there's about 25 other species that they're changing to do this. Now this absorbs carbon at a much faster rate, locking it into the organic compounds within the trees. And it also channels carbon into the soil. Now carbon in the soil is really, really useful. It actually allows the soil, it binds it together better, so that other plants can actually get a foothold in the soil and grow. And it also allows the soil to hold a greater volume of nutrients so that more plants can grow. It's what makes soil fertile. Now, carbon in the soil takes the form of decaying organic matter, normally the fallen leaves, and these are the larger fallen leaves, and there's much more of them falling off of each of these trees, turning into carbon in the soil. Decaying organic matter, such as fallen fruit, which starts to decay, or animals that are decaying in the soil, and also tree roots, which are made predominantly of carbon, and which are in the soil. And carbon in soil is actually an overall measure of how healthy soil is. So around these plants, what you're going to find is healthier soil, which more animals can grow in and which more plants can grow in, increasing the carbon uptake even more. Now, because these plants are growing bigger faster, they've got a greater anabolic metabolism, which is the conversion of carbon dioxide into useful organic compounds, such as glucose, such as starch, such as cellulose. But they also have an increased catabolic metabolism, and that's the breakdown of living cells into other organic compounds. Now, one process of this catabolic mechanism inside of trees is actually called lignification. Lignin is a polymer, and it's made up of 3 different aromatic alcohols. And I actually have them all here. You can see they're actually quite simple molecules. This shows the polymer of lignin, and on each of these organic compounds, carbon 4, which is this one here, has an R group attached to it. That R group is either going to be a hydrogen, it's going to be a 3rd hydroxyl group, or it's going to be a double bonded oxygen. And you can actually see in the way these are all joined together here, you've got these 3 aromatic alcohols joined together in quite a dense structure. Now, another benefit of these trees is because their metabolism is increased, they're actually channeling more lignin into the wood. So they are highly, highly lignified. This makes them really, really strong. And it's actually sequestering much more carbon, and this is called carbon sequestration. And plants are really good at this. This is why 100% of the carbon they take in the form of carbon dioxide is then converted and stored in the long term away from the atmosphere. And that brings me to the end. Does anyone have any questions?
That was very good.
Thank you. I've got the...
What kind of speed do they grow?